Part 1, The 10 Silver Plea. The morning sun had barely climbed over the red hills when Mira led her old horse toward the frontier trading post. Dust swirled around her worn boots with every step. She kept one hand on the horse's reins and the other wrapped tightly around a small cloth bag containing everything she owned. The young orc girl had spent the last 3 days trying to find work, food, or shelter, but nobody wanted to hire someone who arrived with nothing. Her horse, Ash, was the only thing she had left. He was an aging gray gelding with a white mark across his forehead and a tired limp in his rear leg. To everyone else, he looked nearly worthless. To Mira, he was family. She stopped outside the trading post and swallowed hard. 10 silver, she whispered to herself. That's all I need. 10 silver coins could buy flour, beans, blankets, and enough firewood to survive several weeks. Perhaps she could find work before winter arrived. Mira approached the first trader. "Sir," she said quietly, "would you buy my horse?" The trader looked Ash over and laughed. "That old thing. 5 silver. Mira's ears lowered. "He's worth more than that. Then find someone willing to pay more." The trader walked away. Mira's fingers tightened around the reins. She wanted to cry, but she refused to let the crowd see her weakness. She approached another man. "Please. 10 silver. I don't need anything else." The man shook his head. "Free. He's gentle. Strong, too. He just needs food. Then feed him yourself." The word struck harder than the man probably intended. Mira looked down at Ash. His ribs were visible beneath his dusty coat. She had been sharing her own food with him for weeks. "I tried," she whispered. Ash lowered his head against her shoulder. For a moment, Mira closed her eyes. Then she heard laughter behind her. A group of men stood near the saloon, watching her struggle. One of them called out that nobody would pay 10 silver for an old horse and a hungry orc girl. Mira pretended not to hear. She walked toward the center of the trading post and waited. Then a tall Apache rancher stepped down from his horse. His name was Elias. He had been in town to purchase supplies for his isolated ranch. Unlike the others, he hadn't laughed. He had noticed the way Mira looked at Ash, not like an owner looking at an animal, but like someone protecting the last member of her family. Elias approached slowly. "How much?" he asked. Mira looked up. 10 silver. Elias studied Ash. Then he looked at Mira. "Why are you selling him?" Mira hesitated before answering. "Because I'm hungry." Her voice cracked. "And because winter is coming." Elias glanced at the thin blanket tied behind her saddle and the tiny cloth bag hanging from her shoulder. "You don't have a home?" Mira shook her head. "Not anymore." Something changed in Elias's expression. He reached into his coat. Mira expected to hear the familiar clink of coins. Instead, Elias said quietly, "I don't think you need 10 silver." Mira stared at him. "Then, what will you pay?" Elias looked at Ash, then back at her. "I'd rather give you both a home." Mira froze. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Nobody had ever offered her a home without asking for something in return. Her eyes filled with tears. "Both of us," she whispered. Elias nodded. "The horse stays. You stay. If you're willing to work for your meals, there's a place for you at my ranch." Mira looked at Ash. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to smile. "Yes," she whispered. Elias extended his hand. Mira took it. And with that simple gesture, her desperate attempt to sell the last thing she loved became the beginning of a life she had never believed she could have. Part 2, A Door Left Open. Mira barely spoke during the journey to Elias's ranch. She sat beside him on the wagon seat, holding Ash's reins loosely while the old gelding walked behind them. The trading post slowly disappeared behind the hills, but Mira kept looking back until the last rooftops vanished. She still couldn't believe what had happened. A few hours earlier, she had been begging strangers to give her 10 silver coins for her horse. Now she was traveling toward a place called home. But the word felt dangerous. Home was something Mira had learned not to believe in. Elias seemed to understand her silence. He didn't question her past or demand an explanation. He simply guided the wagon along the narrow mountain trail. After several miles, he finally spoke. "You don't have to be afraid." Mira glanced at him. "I'm not afraid." Elias smiled faintly. "You're holding that bag like someone is going to steal it." Mira looked down. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around a little cloth bag containing her few belongings. "I don't have much." "You don't need much." Those words made her uncomfortable. People had told her similar things before, but there had always been a hidden price afterward. As the sun began to set, the ranch finally appeared beyond a line of tall pine trees. Mira stared. It wasn't grand. There was a wooden farmhouse with a wide porch, a small barn, a stable, a water well, and several fenced fields stretching toward the mountains. But to Mira, it looked enormous. Elias stopped the wagon. "This is it." Mira climbed down slowly. "Where?" Elias pointed toward the farmhouse. "Your home." She stared at him. "My home? If you want it to be." Myra's eyes moved toward the stable. "And Ash?" "The stable has an empty stall." She rushed toward the horse before Elias could say anything else. Ash followed her quietly. Mira opened the stall door and looked inside. Fresh straw covered the floor. A bucket of clean water sat in the corner, and there was even a small pile of hay waiting for him. Mira touched the horse's neck. "You hear that, Ash?" The gelding snorted softly. "We have a place." Elias watched from a distance. He noticed Myra's eyes filling with tears but politely looked away. That evening, he prepared a simple meal of beans, potatoes, and fresh bread. Mira sat at the table cautiously. She kept waiting for him to tell her what she owed. Finally, she asked, "What do you want me to do?" Elias looked up from his plate. "Tomorrow, we'll talk about work." "How much?" "How much what?" "How much do I owe you?" Elias leaned back. "You don't owe me anything." Mira frowned. "Nobody gives food for free." "I didn't say you wouldn't work." She looked confused. "You'll work because everyone on a ranch has work to do. You'll eat because you're living here." Mira lowered her eyes. That simple idea was almost impossible for her to understand. Elias showed her the small bedroom at the end of the hallway. It contained a narrow bed, a wooden chest, a chair, and a window overlooking the mountains. Mira stood in the doorway. "This is mine." "Yes." She stepped inside carefully, as if afraid the room might disappear. On the bed was a clean blanket. Mira touched it. She couldn't remember the last time someone had prepared a bed specifically for her. Elias turned to leave. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around." Mira suddenly called after him. "Elias?" He stopped. "Why?" He turned. "Why did you do this?" For a moment, Elias said nothing. Then he answered quietly. "Because once, somebody gave me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go." He walked away before she could ask more. Mira sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, Ash settled into his new stall. For the first time in years, Mira listened to the sounds of a place that wasn't trying to drive her away. She pulled the blanket around herself. And before sleep came, she whispered the words she had been too frightened to say aloud. "Maybe this really is home." ###Part 4, Trouble Comes Riding. The first weeks at Elias's ranch passed peacefully. Mira worked from sunrise until evening. She repaired fences, cared for the animals, helped in the kitchen, and spent every spare moment with Ash. The ranch was slowly becoming more than a place where she had been allowed to stay. It was becoming home. But peace never lasted forever. One afternoon, while Mira was carrying a bucket of water toward the stable, she heard horses approaching from the southern trail. 3 riders appeared through the dust. At the front rode a broad-shouldered man wearing an expensive black coat. Elias immediately stepped onto the porch. Mira stopped walking. Something about the stranger made her uneasy. The man dismounted. "Are you Elias?" "I am. My name is Cole Vance." Elias's expression hardened. "I know who you are." Cole owned one of the largest ranches in the region. He was wealthy, powerful, and known for getting whatever he wanted. Cole glanced toward the stable. Then his eyes stopped on Ash. "That's my horse." Mira froze. "No." Cole turned toward her. "Excuse me." Mira stepped forward. "Ash isn't yours." Cole laughed. "I've been looking for that horse for months." Elias moved between them. "You'd better explain." Cole pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "This horse was stolen from my ranch." Myra's heart began pounding. "That's a lie." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You should be careful accusing a man like me." Mira held Ash's reins tightly. "He was mine long before I came here." Cole laughed. "Then perhaps you can prove it." Mira couldn't. She had no papers. No legal document. Nothing except her memories. Cole looked at Elias. "I'll pay you for him. He's not for sale. I'll pay you enough to make it worth your trouble." Elias shook his head. "Leave." Cole's expression darkened. "You don't understand. That horse belongs to me." And I said leave. For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other. Finally, Cole mounted his horse. But before leaving, he looked toward Mira. "You'll regret choosing this ranch." Then he rode away. Mira watched until the riders disappeared. She turned toward Elias. "What happens now?" "Nothing." "But he said." "I heard him. He'll come back." Elias nodded. "I know." That night, Mira couldn't sleep. She sat beside the window, watching the darkness. If Cole took Ash, she would lose the only creature who had stayed beside her through everything. But worse than that, she feared Elias would suffer because of her. The next morning, she made a decision. She packed her small cloth bag. When Elias entered the kitchen, he found her standing beside the door. "I'm leaving." He stared at her. "No. I have to." "Why?" "Because Cole wants Ash." Elias's jaw tightened. So he'll keep coming after you." Mira lowered her eyes. "I won't let him destroy your ranch because of me." Elias walked closer. "You think leaving will fix this?" "It might." "No." His voice was quiet but firm. Mira looked up. Elias continued. "When I told you this was your home, I meant it. But no." He pointed toward the chair. "Sit." Mira slowly sat. Elias crouched in front of her. "You don't abandon a home because trouble comes." Myra's eyes filled with tears. "I've never had a home before." "I know. Then how do I know how to protect one?" Elias smiled gently. "You don't protect a home by running away from it." He stood. "You protect it by standing together." Mira wiped her eyes. "What if we lose?" Elias looked toward the window. "Then we rebuild." Outside, Ash gave a loud neigh from the stable. Mira smiled through her tears. For the first time, she understood that Elias wasn't simply protecting her. He was trusting her to stand beside him. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Cole Vance was already preparing to return. This time, he wouldn't come alone. #### Part 5, The Truth Beneath the Brand. The following morning, Elias woke before sunrise. He had barely finished feeding the horses when he heard riders approaching. Mira stepped out of the farmhouse and immediately recognized Cole Vance. This time, he had brought 4 armed men. Her heart sank. Cole dismounted slowly and walked toward the barn. "I told you I'd be back." Elias stepped onto the porch. "And I told you to stay away." Cole smiled. "I brought the sheriff this time." A man wearing a silver badge stepped forward. "Mr. Elias, we received a complaint that you are keeping stolen property." Myra's stomach tightened. Cole pointed toward Ash. "That's the horse." The sheriff looked at Mira. "Do you have proof the horse belongs to you?" Mira swallowed. "No papers." Cole smiled. "Exactly." Elias stepped forward. "There's more to this." He walked toward Ash and carefully examined the horse's left shoulder. Underneath the gray coat was an old brand. It was faint, almost invisible. Mira had seen it many times but never understood what it meant. Elias crouched beside the horse. "This brand doesn't belong to Cole's ranch." Cole's expression changed. "What are you talking about?" Elias stood. "I've seen this mark before." The sheriff frowned. "Where?" "On horses sold through the Red Creek trading post." Mira suddenly remembered something. "That's where Ash came from." Everyone looked at her. Mira continued. "Years ago, before I had him, he belonged to an old horse trader named Samuel. He sold Ash to the man who raised me." Cole shook his head. "Convenient story." Myra's hands trembled. "But it's true." Elias looked at the sheriff. "There may be a record." They rode to the trading post. The old owner, Samuel, was still alive. When Elias described Ash, the old man immediately recognized the horse. "Gray gelding. White mark on his forehead." Mira nodded. "That's him." Samuel smiled. "I remember that horse." Cole stepped forward. "You can't prove ownership." Samuel looked at him. "I don't have to." He disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, he returned carrying an old ledger. He opened it carefully. There. Elias leaned over the page. Ash's description was written in faded ink. Samuel pointed to the date. "I sold this horse 6 years ago." "And to whom?" the sheriff asked. Samuel looked at Mira. "To her family." Cole's face went pale. The sheriff turned toward him. "You claimed the horse was stolen from your ranch." Cole remained silent. Samuel shook his head. "That horse never belonged to you." Then Elias noticed something else. The brand on Ash's shoulder had been altered. The original mark had been partially burned over with another symbol. Elias looked at Cole. "You changed the brand." Cole stepped backward. The sheriff's expression hardened. "Mr. Vance, you're coming with me." Cole's men immediately moved toward their horses. But the sheriff raised his hand. "Don't make this worse." Cole stared at Mira. For the first time, there was fear in his eyes. Mira stepped forward. "You tried to take my horse because you thought I had no one." Cole said nothing. "You thought I wouldn't fight because I'm an orc girl." Her voice became stronger. "But I have a home now." Elias stood beside her. "And she isn't standing alone." The sheriff took Cole away. The journey home was quiet. Mira rode beside Elias. For most of the way, she kept staring at Ash. Finally, she spoke. I was scared. I know. I thought he'd take everything. Elias looked at her. You didn't run. Mira smiled. You told me not to. Elias laughed softly. When they reached the ranch, Mira climbed down and hugged Ash. Then she looked at the farmhouse. Her farmhouse. Her stable. Her fields. Her home. She finally understood something Elias had been trying to teach her. Home wasn't simply a roof over her head. Home was the place where someone believed you were worth protecting, and where you learned that you were strong enough to protect it too. That evening, Mira sat beside Elias on the porch. I think I finally understand why you gave me a home. Elias looked at her. Why? Because you knew I would eventually learn how to make it mine. Elias smiled. I knew you would. And beneath the quiet evening sky, Mira realized that the frightened girl who had once begged for 10 silver coins was finally gone. Part 6, more than 10 silver. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. The snow melted from the distant peaks, wildflowers appeared beside the fences, and the ranch began to feel alive again. Mira stood in the garden one morning, planting the first rows of vegetables. Ash grazed nearby, stronger than he had been in years. She smiled as she watched him. It was difficult to remember the frightened girl who had once stood at the trading post, begging someone to give her 10 silver coins. That girl had believed she had nothing. Now she had a ranch. She had work. She had Ash. And, most importantly, she had Elias. Over the following months, the ranch prospered. Mira became responsible for the horses and gradually earned the trust of neighboring ranchers. People who had once ignored her now came to ask for her advice. She had become known as the young orc woman who could calm even the most difficult horse. But there was one thing she still hadn't forgotten. The day Elias had looked at her and said, I'd rather give you both a home. One evening, Mira found Elias sitting on the porch. The sun was disappearing behind the mountains. She carried 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. Thank you. Mira sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then she asked, Can I ask you something? Elias smiled. You've asked me plenty of questions. Why didn't you just buy Ash? Elias looked toward the stable. Because I knew you weren't really selling the horse. Mira frowned. What was I selling? Your last piece of security. She looked down at her hands. I thought I needed 10 silver. You needed a place where you didn't have to sell the things you loved just to survive. Mira's eyes became wet. You knew that? I guessed. She smiled. You always seem to know things. Not always. They both laughed. Mira looked toward the mountains. When you first said I could stay, I thought you would change your mind. I didn't. I thought you'd eventually ask me to leave. I never planned to. I thought I wasn't worth keeping. Elias became silent. Then he turned toward her. Mira, people don't have to earn the right to be treated like human beings. She looked at him. You didn't owe me 10 silver. No. You didn't owe me a horse. No. You didn't owe me a home. Elias shook his head. Maybe not. Mira smiled. But you gave me all free. Elias looked down at his coffee. Not exactly. Mira laughed softly. You gave me a home. That's better. The wind moved gently through the trees. Ash raised his head from the pasture. Mira stood. She walked toward the stable and opened the gate. Ash approached her. She wrapped her arms around his neck. You remember the trading post? The horse snorted. I thought we'd lose everything. She rested her forehead against him. But we didn't. When Mira returned to the porch, Elias was still waiting. She sat beside him again. I have something to tell you. What? I don't want to leave. Elias smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Mira looked at him. Not because I need a place anymore. He nodded. I know. I want to stay because this is my home. Elias's expression softened. Then stay. Mira took his hand. For a moment, they simply sat together beneath the evening sky. Neither needed to say anything more. They had both lost people. They had both known loneliness. They had both believed that life had taken more from them than it could ever give back. But somehow, on a dusty day at a frontier trading post, a desperate girl asking for 10 silver coins and a lonely rancher had found each other. Mira had gone there hoping to sell her horse. Instead, she had found a future. And Elias had believed he was giving a home to a stranger. In the end, he discovered that he had gained family. The next morning, Mira placed a small wooden sign above the farmhouse door. It read, "The home we chose." Elias stood behind her. Why that name? Mira smiled. Because home isn't always the place where you're born. She looked at him. Sometimes it's the place where someone finally chooses you. Elias nodded. And sometimes, he said, you choose them back. Together, they walked toward the fields as the morning sun rose over the mountains. Behind them stood the little farmhouse. Ahead waited a lifetime. And neither of them was alone anymore.